Hi, sixth graders. Today's notes are going to be starting our next unit. So we finished up fractions, decimals, and percents, and so this is a brand new topic, brand new unit since we took our fractions, decimals, and percents test, and this is called exponents. We're going to be talking about exponents today. So if you'll think back to maybe when you learned about order of operations last year in 5th grade, you probably learned this acronym PEMDAS. So you may have learned when you're solving a math problem with a long string of just a bunch of different operations, you learn parentheses, and then you learn E, and then you learn MD, multiplication and division, and then AS, which stands for addition and subtraction. But last year in 5th grade, you don't do a lot of the E. And so the E is actually stands for the E in exponents here. And so the E in the order of operations is this topic called exponents. And so we're going to spend some time learning what an exponent is and how it works. So there are actually 3 different ways or 3 different forms that an exponent will actually take. So we have what we call exponent form. So go ahead and write that down, and we're going to sort of box that off. And then we have what's called expanded form. And we're going to box that off. And then we have what's called standard form. And so we're just going to jump into an example. So for exponent form, here's what an exponent looks like. So we're going to have a large number, which we call the base. And so this is going to be our 2. So 2 is the base. And I'm going to grab a different color marker here for just a second, because then we have what's called the exponent, which is a little number that flies up in the air above the 2. It's a little tiny number. And again, it sort of flies it flies up in the air right after the number up in the air. And that is what we call the exponent. So the number flying in the air is the exponent, the big number is the base, and what exponents do is they indicate repeated multiplication. And so this would be what we call exponent form. It's going to be a big number and then a little number flying above it. Now what that means in expanded form is this. We're going to put an equal sign. And so expanded form is the form that it takes when we repeat multiplication. And so here's what this is telling us. This is telling us to take the number 2, the big number, we're always going to be focused on the big number, and write it this many times. So the exponent tells me how many times to write it. So the big number is 2, so I'm going to write down a 2. How many times am I going to write down 2? I'm going to write 2 down 4 times. That's the exponent. So I'm going to write down 4 2s. Just write down a 2, the big number again, this many times, 4 times, and put multiplication between them. And so I'm going to put dots in between them just to represent repeated multiplication. So 2 with an exponent of 4 is the same thing as 2 times 2 times 2 times 2. And then the standard form is actually going to be the answered. So standard form would be what we actually get when we multiply this out. And so I do want to introduce you to the calculator that you're going to be using this year. So there is a calculator that 6th graders are allowed to use. The topics that we've learned so far, you should not have been using a calculator on. Those are the topics that you have to be able to know how to do without a calculator. But I'm going to go into Schoology real quick. I'll bring up our Schoology course. And of course, this is the screen that you see when you log into Schoology every day. And if you will look right below our weekly schedule, so here's the schedule that we always look at every single day to tell us what to do. If you look right below there, there is now a link that says calculator, and it's a website called desmos.com, and it says /scientific. And so if you will click on that, this is the calculator that you are allowed to use in the 6th grade. So it's completely online. This calculator, this Desmos calculator, is embedded into the into your SOL test at the end of the year. And so that's pretty cool. If you want to right now, I would suggest going ahead and clicking the star in your address bar up here and saving this as Desmos calculator to your bookmarks bar and that way you can access it really quickly. Now, if you can't see your bookmarks bar, you may need to, maybe, I think it's this button right here. Yeah, you may need to click on the little button beside where your Google, right next to the address bar, and you may need to click on bookmarks, and you may need to click on show bookmarks bar, because that's where mine is being shown right now. And so if you see, my Desmos is now saved to my bookmarks bar. I've got a lot of things on my bookmarks bar, but you can move it around and you can see it. There it is a little closer. Now, my algebra students also use a Desmos calculator, and so that's why I have two of these here. You want to make sure, as a sixth grader, you want to make sure that you're using the scientific one. And so here's what it looks like. So if you go back to what we were just looking at in our notes, the thing that we're trying to do is we're trying to figure out what is 2 times 2 times 2 times 2. Now, we could multiply that out, and you could probably, because this is a 2, it's probably pretty easy math. You may even be able to do that in your head or work that out on a piece of paper. But the calculator is going to make it really nice, because what I can do is I can type this in just repeatedly, 2 times 2 times 2 times 2, and I'm going to hit equals, which is actually the enter button here. It means give me the solution. And I get the answer 16. Actually, I don't even think you have to hit that button. I think it just comes up automatically, right? If you type in 2 times 2 times 2, and you can, yeah, you can see your work here, and then you can see the answer over here. So the standard form, 2 times 2 times 2 times 2, gives us the standard form answer of 16. And so that is what we're going to be doing in order to figure out what exponents are equal to. Now, there is a way that we read this exponent. So I've been saying a base of 2 and an exponent of 4, but the way that we actually read exponents goes like this. We would say this is 2, the number 2, to the 4th power. So another word for an exponent is a power, and that just means, again, the exponent tells you how many times you are writing it out. So we're going to try a few of these, and so if you will just continue this, continue these lines down for this exponent form, expanded form, standard form. I'm going to sort of separate this off into a chart, and we're going to do another example down here, and we're going to put a few more examples here. So let's try one like this. So what if we had the large number 9, and then we had a little 5 floating next to it? So first of all, we want to know how we would say this. So we would read this as 9 to the 5th power. 9 to the 5th power is how we would read that. And so what would that mean? So that's what it is in exponent form, with the big number and the little number floating up next to it. But what would that be in expanded form? Well, it's, again, we're writing, you always write the big number. You're never going to write a 5. You don't want to write down a 5. It's floating up in the air. That's how many times we're going to write it. We will always write a 9, the big number, and how many times are we going to write it? We're going to write 5 9s. Leave a little space between them. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Yeah, 5 of those, and then we're going to put multiplication in between them all. So 9 times 9 times 9 times 9 times 9. And then standard form, of course, we'll go over back here to our calculator. And you can either hit enter to get a new line, or you can just backspace all that old stuff off. And so we're going to type in 5 times 5 times, oh, not 5. Goodness, I told you a minute ago not to write down a 5. It's 9. 9 times 9 times 9 times 9 times 9. You want to count them carefully. Make sure you've got 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And so the answer, a really large number, because we would not want to work this out by hand. The answer here is going to be 59,049. So I'm going to go back to my notes. 59,049. And you can put your comma in there if you like. So that's what it would be in standard form. So 9 to the 5th power means 9 times itself 5 times, which is 59,049. Now, there are a few exponents that have some special names. So let's go to our next example. So one of those exponents with a special name would be something like this. 4 with a 2 as an exponent. So one way we would say this is just like we have been up here. We would say this as 4 to the 2nd power. It's 4 to the second power. But we could also say this as 4 squared. That's a special name for that 2 exponent, is the word squared. And so let's go ahead and see what would this look like expanded. So again, we're only writing the big number. So we're going to write down a 4. How many times are we going to write it down? We're only going to write it down twice. So we're going to write down a 4 and a 4. Put your multiplication between them. Hopefully you know what 4 times 4 is. If you didn't know, you could hop over to the calculator and type in 4 times 4. 4 times 4 is 16. And so that is what it is in standard form. Another example that has a special name would be a number to the third power. So we would say this, and I'm not going to write it out again, but we would say this as 10 to the third power. So we could say 10 to the third power. We would also, the special name for this is 10 cubed. So that's just another way of saying 10 to the third power. And so 10 cubed or 10 to the third power, again, we're writing the big number. We'd write 10. We'd write it 3 times, put multiplication between those 10s, and we could go and multiply that out. Backspace this out, so we type in 10 times 10 times 10, and that gives us 1,000. And so my standard form answer is going to be 1,000. Now, something actually really interesting starts happening when you have powers of 10. So I just want to real quickly, let's do another one. Let's say 10 to the, I don't know, 5th power. If you did 10 to the 5th power, that would be 10 times 10 times 10 times 10 times 10. And if you go type that into your calculator, so 10, big number, 5 times. If we go type that in, we've already got 3 in here, so I'm just going to go another one and another one. We'd write that number down. Now that's 100,000. That's a 1 with how many zeros? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And so when you're dealing with powers of 10, a kind of nice pattern happens. 2, 3, 4, 5. Notice that when we had 10 to the third power, how many zeros did this have after the 1? If you do 10 to the 5th power, there's going to be 5 zeros. So just as a final example with these powers of 10, what if you had 10 to the, let's say, the 7th power? Of course, you would write out 10 7 times, but can you go ahead and see if you can figure out what would the standard form number look like? It would have a 1, and then it would have what? How many zeros? It would have 7 zeros. And so that's a real quick way to think about, we call these powers of 10. So these are powers of 10, and it's 10 to any kind of power is always going to be a 1 with this many zeros, is a helpful way to figure out the standard form. All right, just a couple more examples, actually one more example, and then I'm going to give you a few to work out on your own. So the last example that I want to go over is something like, let's say 2 to the 1st power. And so anytime you have something to the 1st power, that's going to be written once. So anything to the 1st power would just be writing this big number 1 time. There's going to be no multiplication involved. So actually the expanded form is going to be exactly the same as the standard form, 2 and 2. This is a 2 1 time. Now the last thing I want to make sure you know is, let's say something like 6 to the 0 power. Now this is a tricky one, and a lot of people want to say, well, if it's a 6 0 times, that must mean that it's 0, right? Well, no, there's actually a pattern that happens here, and I'm going to write this out on a separate sheet of paper. If you think about what, let's say 6 to the 2nd power is, and 6 to the 1st, and then 6 to the 0, if we look at the pattern that happens here, 6 to the 2nd power, of course, would be 6 times 6, which would be 36. 6 to the 1st power would be just a 6 1 time, or just 6 again. And so if you look at what's happening here, to get from 36 to 6, we divide by 6. And so to get to the next number here, 6 to the 0 power, which is moving down one more exponent, we have to divide by 6 again, and 6 divided by 6 is actually 1. And that seems a little strange, but just know anything to the 0 power is going to be a 1. Anything to the 0 power is 1. So just as an example, if I had, I don't know, 125 to the 0 power, that's still going to be 1. Anything to the 0 power is 1. Anything to the first power is itself. Anything to the 0 power is 1. So I'm going to give you just a few to try on your own. We'll go over the answer. But these are just a few that just try these on exponents on your own. See if you can write them out and figure out what their standard form is. So let's try 5 to the second power, or 5 squared. Let's try 3 to the first power. Let's try 4 to the sixth power. And let's try 7 to the third power, or 7 cubed. So go ahead and maybe on a scratch sheet of paper, or maybe on the back somewhere in your notebook, go ahead and try these examples. Maybe pause the video, and then we'll come back and we'll check our answers. All right, I hope you have paused the video and tried to figure out the answers here. Of course, you can use the calculator. And so I'm just going to write these out in expanded form first. So remember, this is going to be 5 twice, so this is 5 times 5. This is going to be 3 one time, so this is going to be 3. This is going to be 4 times itself 6 times. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And 7 to the third power, so 7 times 7 times 7. So that's your expanded form. Now we could use our calculator to help us find the standard form. Hopefully you know 5 times 5, but you could, of course, count it, put it in the calculator. So 5 times 5 gives me 25 as standard form. 3, of course, there's nothing to multiply there, so that's still just 3. 4 to the sixth power, I'm actually going to have to type in. So let's clear this out. 4 to the sixth power, so 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Again, make sure you count them when you're done to make sure you put in the right amount. That's 4,096. So 4,096. And then 7 to the third power is, of course, going to be 7 times 7 times 7. So let's type that in. 7 times 7 times 7. And that's going to be 343. So 343. Now, final thing before you turn off this video, and I hope you've made it this far, because if you haven't, you're going to miss something super important. Your calculator actually has an exponent button. Now, you need to know expanded form, so you need to know how to write out the multiplication. But if you look at the calculator again, notice, let's look at our first problem here. It was 5 to the second power, 5 squared. If you look on your calculator, there actually is an exponent button over here. So there's actually it's a squared. This will square things, but this little a and then a b up in the air, that will let you type in any exponent. So I would say you would tend to use this button more than you would even use this one. This one you can hit if it's a squared or if it's to the second power. But if I hit 5 and then I hit this button, notice how my cursor goes up in the air, and I can type in 2. And I can actually type in an exponent. And so notice that from our notes here, 5 to the second power was actually 25. And that's what our calculator is telling us here as well. So you can get the final answer by using that exponent button. Let's see if it works with 3 to the first power was 3. So if you look at your calculator, let's back this out. So if I type in 3 and then I hit that exponent button and then I type in 1, 3 to the first power is 3. The next example was 4 to the sixth power, and so I could also type that in. 4,096 was our answer, so I could type in 4, hit the exponent button, hit the 6. 4 to the sixth power is 4,096. It gives me that answer without having to type in all that repeated multiplication. And then the last one was 7 to the third power, which should be 343. And so I would go over here, I'd hit 7, I'd hit that exponent button, and I'd type in the 3, and I could get 343. So that's a way to get the standard form answer if you don't need to go through this whole expanded multiplication. Now, there are going to be questions that are going to ask you to expand the multiplication, so just be careful about that. And that is the topic of exponents.